external influences session was, for me, probably the most important one, coming from the perspective of Cape York. I think Isaac's talk about the second wave of contact in the Cape York Peninsula kind of articulated the problems that have already been experienced by Aboriginal groups throughout the country, and problems that are going to be experienced by Aboriginal groups in the peninsula. One of the things that's really struck me about what's happening in Cape York is that I remember having a talk to Frank Brennan just on the occasion of the handover of the deed of grant in trust in 1986. I said to Frank that perhaps the regime that was established by the Community Services Act and by the deed of grant in trust has been singularly the worst development that's happened for our communities, because under the reserve situation in Cape York was virtually a no-go zone. Access to Aboriginal areas was by permit, and that permit, the horrible effect of that permit was because of the fact that the discretion in relation to that permit lay with the department, with the government, and specifically with the reserve managers. There was a big reversal of policy in 1984 where the government realised that the land rights agenda in Queensland would not be quelled unless they got rid of those laws which were blatantly discriminatory. So they realised that they had to start treating Aboriginal people as equal citizens. A necessary corollary, in their view, with equality of Aboriginal people was the removal of difference. And the Community Services Act set out to remove that difference. Now that doesn't mean that there still remain elements in that legislation which are discriminatory. There are aspects of the legislation which are still discriminatory, but in its underlying policy and its emphasis, the Act is attempting to get rid of all those discriminatory provisions that were in that old Aborigines Act about permit systems and control of Aboriginal people. The Community Services Act, in attempting to get rid of the difference, also aimed at reducing the rights of Aboriginal people. The only way you can diffuse the Aboriginal land rights question is to remove difference. Aboriginal people have no greater rights than the white people in Queensland. And the emphasis of policy since 1984 has always been that Aboriginal people are now part of the social and economic network of the state of Queensland. Aboriginal people are normal Queenslanders now. Therefore, the policy has always been named as being one of normalisation and of mainstreaming. It was a very, I think, very clever policy change that occurred in 1984, because if you think about it, in the early 1980s, Queensland was probably the most notorious state in this country in terms of the prevailing discriminatory laws, and was probably targeted as being the Australia's shining example of continued white racism. And I think the Commonwealth would have to have been forced internationally to act in relation to Aboriginal rights. So Sparks and Bajulki Peterson utterly changed their point of view in 1984 and said that if we don't grant certain rights now, we're going to have to concede greater rights at the hands of the Commonwealth at some later stage. And if you think about it, and it's really difficult for some community people to or at least at Hopevale to see, that in fact there was no additional rights granted. Not 1 square inch of additional land was handed over in relation to the deed of grant and trust. All we got was title to those existing reserves that were set aside for our benefit in the first place anyway. In granting title to us, they also opened up our lands. And that's why I found the paper on the importance of roads as being really relevant to the Queensland situation and relevant to the deed of grant and trust situation. And I don't know if Frank Brennan would have agreed with my view that perhaps we were better off under the old reserve system. But certainly in relation to road access, we would have been better off under the old reserve system in trying to control outside tourist and other outside access to our lands. In relation to land usage and stuff, the restrictive regime that prevailed in relation to reserves was probably a protective thing in many ways. And I think some of the procedures for leases to community individuals under the new legislation is recipe for greater disaster than could ever have occurred under the old Aborigines Act. But it's really in trying to come to terms with that government policy, it's really interesting for me to see how difficult it is for some of our community people to understand and to accept government policy. I mean, quite understandably, because we're talking about equality and difference, and we want to be treated equally. And all the people in Hopevale who've struggled over the years to try and achieve equality in this society have now come to a situation where, now that they're granted equality, now that they're treated the same as white Queenslanders, in fact, their substantive rights are not going to be recognised under a policy of equal treatment. Because special treatment is not equal treatment, according to the Queensland government. And people are very suspicious of any special measures that are taken in legislation, because special measures in the past have always meant unequal measures. Any special legislation for Aboriginal people are viewed with great suspicion by Aboriginal people in the communities, precisely because those laws have been used to oppress them. But of course, the other side of the coin is that special laws need not be discriminatory. In fact, special laws are going to be necessary in order to properly give us equality in this society. But those special laws must firstly be requested by us and be consented to by us. And I must say that in the Community Services Act at the moment, there are special laws, say in relation to local government, that have not been especially requested by Aboriginal people, and certainly not been consented by most Aboriginal people. So I constantly come up to the argument in the communities that no, we want one law. We want one Australian law, one Queensland law. And the argument is most often put by people who have endured the dual system of law which said Aboriginal people must be treated unequally. The other issue, I suppose, of big interest to me in that session was the question of anthropology and Aboriginal politics. See, this collision between the hot voice of Aboriginal emotion and the cool, sane voice of anthropology has probably obsessed most of us in this room for a long time. And I'm just suggesting, I had a read through of the Code of Ethics for the Anthropological Association, and I still don't think it has addressed this question, and that is that in 1990 the day is gone when Aboriginal people need anthropologists to be their advocates. I think the day has come when Aboriginal people must be put in the forefront of negotiation with government and about decision making. But that is not to say that anthropology as a tool is not useful to Aboriginal people, and that anthropologists as people are not greatly respected. See, I've had this tussle in my own head about the role of anthropologists in my own community, and there's a certain irony in my distrust for anthropologists and the great affection that people at Hopevale have for the various anthropologists that have worked there. Because, and I thought about it, and the fact of the matter is that most of the time in our communities, and this is where Gladys's comment yesterday kind of rung true, was that the anthropologists are on many occasions the only people who are talking to our old people. The only time there is action and there's conversation in the front veranda of the old people's home at Hopevale is when the anthropologist is in town. The young people of the town and of the community are not talking to our old people. And obviously, these old people have a great affection for these people who respect their knowledge, who view them as intellectuals of their own society, and as people who are capable of thinking in ways other than just being a source of data for their research. So I like the idea that Gladys mentioned about anthropologists about Aboriginal people being anthropologists of their own society. And I think of a couple of old people at Hopevale and who've been students of their own culture for over 70 years now. Old fellow Roger Hart at Hopevale was taken away as a 7-year-old from Barrow Point, living in a mission environment, and all through his life he has sought to regain that which he had lost. And today he's fluent in his language, the only surviving speaker of the language of that area, and all through his life he's tried to piece together the language of his area and the history of his people. And he's done that, not even before any anthropologists came to Hopevale. He's done that through his associations with the last of his remaining people, and then through work with Peter Sutton and John Havland at Hopevale, he's been able to learn more. And I really think that community thinking in administration and in politics and in land rights and stuff could be and should be informed by these people, you know. So what I'm suggesting is that perhaps the conference here should consider, especially since the session really brought the role of anthropology to the front of our minds. I think the conference should consider that perhaps the appropriate model is that anthropologists working in areas affecting Aboriginal politics should always be employed by Aboriginal organisations. See, Aboriginal people are suspicious of anthropologists because there was a great marriage between anthropology and government policy. You know, Elkin is a classic example of the marriage of policy, government policy, and anthropology, and outside of the control of Aboriginal people. The day has come now when anthropologists must be controlled by the Aboriginal community. In 1990, see, with the National Party government, of course, those anthropologists in Queensland at least were precluded from being involved in determining government policy or advising on government policy. But now that this new government has come in, there is a danger now that anthropologists are going to be employed, because we have a sympathetic government now that wants to get to the real Aboriginal viewpoint. But they don't want that Aboriginal viewpoint to come from radicals, come from people who are intent on talking about emotion. They want the cool voice of anthropology to tell them the Aboriginal viewpoint. And I'm afraid that in many instances, anthropology might counsel cooperation when Aboriginal people might be wanting to counsel resistance. Anthropology might be counseling the unitary state, while Aboriginal people are wanting to counsel separatism. Because those are important political decisions. In most anthropological writings, the anthropologist presumes the unitary state. And yet, why is it that when Aboriginal people get up to articulate their position, is that the unitary state is far from representing their point of view? There have been some disturbing developments, I think, in this past 7 months of the Labor government, because the Labor government has not gone out, and this is my experience with the Aboriginal Coordinating Council, the Labor government has not gone out and sought Aboriginal opinion from the grassroots. Rather, they want that Aboriginal opinion to be filtered through a more reasonable voice. And I think that perhaps this conference should consider that as a matter of policy in this state at least, that anthropologists should always be engaged by Aboriginal organisations, by the councils, so that those councils and those organisations can strike agreements with those anthropologists as to the parameters of their activities and the parameters of their pronouncements about what policy should be. I think that's what I got out of that session.
Thanks, Noel. I pity the person who has to follow him.